Hey guys, I'm super excited. We are going to jump into photography and all the things to know about photography, but today is the best day out of all of them because today we're learning manual mode. Dun, 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 dun. Super exciting, right? Doesn't actually sound exciting, except that it is exciting because if you learn how to use manual mode, you can basically do anything. Like, for example, if you know how to use manual mode and you go to a party and it is dark room and you're not allowed to use flash for some weird reason, which does happen, by the way, you will know how to take your camera and brighten up the images so it doesn't look like it's such a dark room. What if you're out on a walk and you see a beautiful waterfall and you snap a picture and it doesn't have like that flowing beautiful look that all those waterfall pictures have? Well, with manual mode you will know how to switch that up and capture it with that smooth look. Shutter speed, by the way. Okay, what if you're a photographer and you're taking pictures of a wedding? You have the bride and groom there and the sun is shining and a cloud comes and a cloud goes and a cloud comes and a cloud goes really fast. Well, with manual mode, you can compensate for dark then light, then dark then light, and you can make all your pictures look consistent, which is actually the key to making like more money as a photographer. Okay, what if you have a huge group of people, like say 50 people, and you can get some of them in focus, but not all of them in focus? It can be a really big pain, especially when you go home and you realize everyone was in focus. How do you change that? Manual mode. You need to know those settings to be able to switch it up so that everyone is in focus. But then when you go to take detailed shots of little things and you want the background to be blurry and just that creamy high-end look, again, you're switching your settings from that 50 group of people shot. You're switching them all the way to the opposite in manual mode. Manual mode is what helps you be able to do whatever you want to do in whatever situation. Manual mode is what is going to make you a professional like overnight. It is so much fun once you figure out manual mode. It's basically 3 pieces, 3 little things you have to know. You can literally go do sports photography, you can go do nature photography, you can do weddings, portraits, you can do dark room photography, whatever it is that you want to do, just because you will have the technical skills that you need just right at your fingertips. It is so wonderful. Okay, so let's start mastering the manual mode. Okay, but I want to say before we get started, don't feel overwhelmed if it feels confusing at first. When I was younger, I took a college course and it was like 4 weeks long, and this is what I learned. Plus maybe 1 or 2 extra things, but like 4 weeks learning these 3 things in manual mode. So if it feels overwhelming, it's because it is. But there's only 3 things, and I promise you will get it. And you probably will get it in just this one lesson. So we're just packing it full because I know you guys can learn really fast, and it's going to set you up to be able to do everything else that you want to do. So that's why we're doing it all today. Okay, so jumping into the 3 things. Now, I think of these 3 things as kind of a tug of war. Think of a triangle. There's 3 things. We've got the ISO at the top, we've got aperture and shutter speed, and they're kind of in a tug of war. And in order for you to be able to take a picture and it not be white or black or too dark or too light, you need to have these 3 tug-of-war men balanced out. Otherwise, you're going to fall off in the ditch of too black or too white. So there's these 3 pieces, and that's all there is to it. 3 pieces that you have to balance out. And it's kind of like, it's kind of like a scale, except there's 3. Like if you have a scale or a teeter-totter, you're balancing 2 things. In this situation, you're balancing 3 things. So instead of trying to master them all at once in this big mess, let's do them one at a time. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is when you're going to change the lease. It's the ISO. Now, the ISO stands for something. I've looked it up before and I don't really think it means anything. of significance. So anyways, you can just call it the ISO. The ISO helps you keep the same brightness. So here on the screen, I have 100 ISO, and you can see the girls, they're nice and bright, but then same picture, let's say it's taken at night. It wasn't really, but let's just say it was. I could make it look like that if I was using a high ISO. So in the bright sunshine, I'm using a low ISO, and in the dark, I'm using a high ISO, and I can get the same picture just from using ISO, just from changing that. Now you can see the downside on the screen. The downside is more noise. Now the nicer camera you have, the better the situation is. But I switched cameras from like a 5D Mark IV to an R6, and I have more trouble with it now. So it's part of life, but if you have a lower end camera, you might notice like it's a problem, and we'll learn how to deal with that in editing. So we want to minimize that, but for now, don't worry about it too much. When you're in the dark, crank up that ISO. And when you're in the bright sunshine, go down to 100. Picture shows you why you need your ISO. Here we have the bright sunshine at 100 ISO. And I just left my ISO at 100. And as the sun set, it started getting darker, and my picture started getting darker. And then it got dark, and I kept my ISO at 100, and my picture is dark. Now, I could have changed this by jumping up to 32,000 or 64,000 ISO, and I could have taken that picture in the dark and it would have brightened it up. So that is pretty special with ISO. Generally, you want to be lower, but hey, if you're in the dark, go ahead and crank it up. It's pretty much your only option. Okay, now we're on to the confusing part. Okay, I want you to think of aperture like a window. You could have a small window and your room would be dark, or you could have a really big window and your room would be very bright. Now the window controls how much light is being let into your room. So a small window lets in a little bit of light, and a big window lets in a lot of light. And so your camera has a window. It can see a little bit or a lot. Now, if it's seeing a lot, you're probably down at 1.2. And if you're seeing just a little bit, a little hole there, then you're probably at f-stop 16. So here's a diagram. And now, if I'm taking a picture of some shoes or some little chicks or something where I want it to be blurry background, or I'm taking a picture of a person and I want them to have a blurry background and to be like high-end wedding, like I'm being paid like $6,000 for this photo. If that's what you want, then you want to crank down to f-stop like 1.4 or 1.2 if you have that. Now, your camera might not have 1.4, not your camera, but your lens. So you might be like f.5.6 or something like that, kind of in the middle, which means your camera does not let in as much light as my camera lens might be letting in. And so you're kind of stuck in that you can't go in as dark of situations because your aperture is not letting in as much light. Also, your backgrounds aren't going to be as creamy, but they will be creamier at f5.6 than if you go to like f-stop 16. Now, why would you want to use f16? Well, if you're taking pictures of maybe mountains or something, or you don't know what to do with your settings and like things are just too bright, then you can crank that hole down and only let in a little bit of light. Here's your test question. If it's dark, what aperture is the best? f1.4 or f16 or something in between? What do you think is the best if it's dark and you need more light to come in to your lens in order to see anything at all? It is, f1.4 because it's dark and you aren't going to see anything at all unless you let in a lot more light. So you're opening up that hole and letting light. I guess you could think of it like a hose. If you have a bigger hose, you can get more water through, right? Same with a window. If you have a bigger window, you can get more through. So that is what you want in the dark. Okay, our last one is shutter speed. How fast can you snap? Literally, you can hear your camera go. And if you slow down your shutter speed so it's really slow, you might hear it go. So why does that matter? If it's really slow, you could have run across the field while I was taking a picture of you. And so you're going to be like, you might just be a streak. And here on the picture, you can see these bikers are just a streak. And then at 1/30, you're still seeing like lots of blur. And then if you actually don't want something to be blurry, then you need it to be fast. However it goes. Basically, your picture is not going to take a long time to take. It's just going to go bam. Generally, what I say to do is if you have a lens, okay, here is my little trick. If you have a lens, this lens is an 85 millimeter. That means my shutter speed is never gonna go below 85. If it goes below 85, I'm gonna have so many issues with like blurry eyes, blurry movement. Like it'll be a perfect picture, but like someone moved their arm and it's just like I see the whole arm moving and I can't save the picture because there's nothing you can do with that in Lightroom. So my rule is I never go below the number of my lens. So whatever the lens I'm using, I never go below that number with my shutter speed. My shutter speed has to stay above that number. Okay, but obviously there's a reason that sometimes we want a slower shutter speed, right? When do you actually want a slow shutter speed? Okay, here's your examples. If you're doing that waterfall where you need a slow picture so you can capture it moving and track that particle of water from the top to the bottom. Or another example would be star photography. If it's dark outside, there is no way you can get enough light into your lens to actually see anything unless you give it a long time. And then your camera can slowly collect that light. And you can sit there for a minute, 5 minutes, while it slowly takes this picture and just lets in all the light. So you've got your aperture opened up, maybe, and then you have your shutter just open, and then finally it closes and that picture is done. And it's beautiful because you've collected light that wasn't there in a snap of a finger. It had to sit open for a while to be able to see those stars, to be able to see those city lights. And you'll be able to figure out, like, do I need a full minute? Do I need like 30 seconds, 5 seconds? As you play with it and as you see how much light your camera is actually able to take in. But here's a big question. When do you need to use a tripod? Wow. Tripods are not my favorite. But if you're doing these long, I don't know if you've ever tried it, but you might notice that your hands like slightly shake in your camera. It picks it up and other things are blurry and you don't really want things to be blurry other than the thing you intended to be blurry. So that is when you want to use a tripod. Basically, anytime where your shutter speed is below 30, pull out that tripod. You need that stabilization. Otherwise, you're gonna have extra things blurry that you were not intending. Okay, so what are my settings? My ISO is the lowest I can get it always because I want high quality. Now that's usually in the range of 100 to 400. And at night, I do jump way higher. I could be at 32,000 or I could be at 46,000 or 64,000. It doesn't really matter too much, but generally I love to get my high quality as much as I can so I don't have to deal with that later in Lightroom where I'm having to fix that. Okay, my aperture is usually f1.4 because that's what my lens can do. Just go the lowest you can go usually, and we'll cover focus later because the shallower the depth of field, the more focus problems you might have. but it's gonna look so much more high quality if you can just keep that aperture number down low and keep that aperture open wide so you can let in as much light as you can. All right, and shutter speed. This is the last thing I adjust, and I just adjust it for the right exposure. If my picture is looking white or if it's looking too dark, then I just adjust this so that it looks right. So this is my last thing to adjust, but it has to be above 100 for me. Otherwise, I'm not really happy with it. It's like not fast enough. I want my picture, I want to be able to just snap, 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 you know, bride and groom coming down the aisle or kids running. These pictures need to be so fast. Otherwise, I'm going to get into Lightroom and be like, blah, okay. It's sort of okay, not really. I hate editing these, you know. So I like to keep it above 100. You can go lower though, personal pictures or whatever. It's fine, but just think of that. I'm using this last piece as just exposure fixer, but I do like it to be above 100. Okay, so let's just quickly go over some commonly asked questions. And I got my computer here. I'm gonna read them. My picture is blurry on my subject's face. How do I fix that? This is a shutter speed issue usually. I really hate it when I go take pictures and then I come home and I'm like, oh, I have to fix it. There's not much you can do to fix it. You can sharpen it a little bit, but honestly, just make sure your shutter speed is up, like above 100 if you can. At least above 30 if you can't make it to 100. All right, question number 2. I can't get everything in focus. What do I do? What do I do? Okay, you have 2 options. If your aperture is down, and you've opened it up, you're gonna have a shallow depth of field. That means someone's nose could be in focus, but not their eyes or their ears. In that circumstance, I would just focus on their eyes and everything else doesn't really matter to me, and everything behind them falls into focus. Focus falls backwards. But the other way you could fix this is just by upping that aperture. So your aperture is big, wide, open window, and you bringing it down to f4, and that gives you greater depth of field. So I could be in focus here, someone could be behind me and they could be in focus, and someone could be behind them, they could be in focus always also. But the thing to remember, even once you open that up, is focus on the person who's in front, and focus will fall backwards. Anyways, yeah, that's the answer to that question. All right, commonly asked question number 3. If I have to use high ISO, how can I fix the grain? I'd rather not have to fix it, but you can fix it in Lightroom using denoise, and I'll be showing you that later. All right, commonly asked question number 4. I can't get my camera screen from being too dark. How do I balance out my settings? All right. So if you have your shutter speed at like around 100 and you have your aperture like 1.4, or maybe you have a lens that can only go to 5.6 or something like that. If you have those 2 settings dialed in, then the next step is go to your ISO, and it's time for that baby to go up and destroy some of your quality, but it's okay. That's what you need to do. I suggest just keeping your aperture down and keeping your shutter speed around 160, something like that. And then you're just going to up your ISO because obviously it's too dark to be able to see. All right, commonly asked questions. Can I fix a blurry photo in Lightroom? No. Blurry photos are blurry photos, and you can just embrace it and like do a black and white, or you know, something like that. You can like use a sharpen tool sometimes if just one person's eye is a little bit, then sometimes I'll sharpen that and it kind of helps, but you can't really fix blur. So why is that important to know? Well, you have to get your shutter speed right the first time. All right. Can I add a blurry background in Lightroom if I didn't have my aperture low enough? Yeah, but it's easier to do it in your camera. But we'll go over that soon when we get to editing, probably next week, because yeah, you can just take down the contrast but thing to remember, just take your aperture number down, open up that lens, and it will give you that cream, that high end. You'll be able to charge double the prices because you are using a lower aperture number and it's therefore seen as high end. So pro tip for you there. Let's see. I guess that's all the questions I had on my list. Be sure to keep, okay, I think that's all the questions I had on my list. Be sure to keep any of your questions in mind for when we have a Zoom call. And that is it for the 3 technical pieces of manual mode. So I'm excited, have fun, and I'll see you next week.